right, so hi, welcome everybody to our webinar. We're very happy to have you for part 2 of our 2021 Waterbird Identification webinar. On Tuesday, we covered herons and egrets, marsh birds, shorebirds, ducks, not shorebirds, ducks, and what else did we do, Jessica? Seabirds. And then today, we have the whole session dedicated to shorebirds, one of our favorite groups of birds. It used to be a group that I was terrified of, but after a number of years and lots of time spent in the field, I'm less terrified and have learned to love shorebirds. They're super challenging, but fun to identify and so interesting and beautiful. So we welcome you to our webinar today. And let's see, we have the Caribbean Waterbird Census ongoing now. We hope all of you guys will be participating. You can find more information about it on our website, and we will share more links with you and resources at the end of the talk. And we'll have Q&A at the end of the talk, as well as an opportunity to ask questions during the webinar. So do put your questions in the Q&A panel and answer our little quiz questions, informal quiz questions in the chat window. So welcome everybody. And Jeff, I will turn it over to you.
All right. So as Lisa mentioned, today we're going to talk about shorebirds, and I'll start at the bottom line first here. They can be notoriously difficult to identify, and I will be very upfront and honest and say I am not a shorebird ID expert. Shorebirds are very difficult to identify, and often when you talk to the experts and you show a picture of a shorebird, they might very well identify it as two different species, depending on who you're talking to. It just gives you an idea of how difficult some of these birds can be to identify. And I think it's safe to say that there are definitely individuals that probably can't be identified. We always try to do our best, but there's certainly individuals that are almost impossible, if not impossible, to identify. So keep that in mind. They are a very difficult group. They are mostly found along seashores, wetlands, mud flats, coast, wetland environments, both marine and freshwater. They are often as it says here, the long, slender, pointed bills, they probe in the mud or the sand. They also will run across the surface of the mud or sand and chase down surface flies or things like that. They are definitely a wide variety of feeding techniques. And once we go to the next slide, I think it is, it shows some of the different, actually this one works too. You can see a wide variety of bill structures here, for example, and that really gives us a sense of what variety there is in the feeding techniques of these birds. You have the long, slender bill that's used for probing deep in the mud. You might have shorter, thicker bills that are used to turn over rocks and crack open invertebrates. This is just a nice slide that shows the variety of shorebirds that can be seen in the West Indies region. One of the important things that we should recognize is that shorebirds are in decline. They're one of the groups that is dropped 40% since 1970, in the last 50 years, basically. So they're a very important group for us to monitor, so we can understand what the populations are doing and try to determine why populations are dropping, and maybe we can help mitigate those population drops and begin to hopefully see numbers, increasing numbers of shorebirds as opposed to a continued decrease. Next. Shorebirds need the Caribbean. Most of the species breed in the high Arctic or in northern North America, though there are some resident breeders in the Caribbean that we'll certainly talk about today. Many of them travel vast distances, all the way from the high Arctic to the southern tip of South America. Red knot, for example, travels 9,300 miles in its migration. Many of these birds try to eat as much as they can before they leave either the breeding or the wintering range, but no matter how much they eat, they can't make it all the way to the destination. So the Caribbean becomes very important for rest and refuel stopover site, as well as for overwintering. And the CWC count is really geared towards really understanding and counting these shorebirds as they're moving through and wintering in the West Indies region. Some clues to help identify shorebirds: size. Often some species will look very similar, but they're very different in size. So if you have 2 or 3 species together, you know what one of those 3 species is, then you can kind of gauge what the size is of the nearby species, and that can help us narrow down what shorebird we're actually looking at. I mentioned bill shape a little bit before. Bill shape and size definitely has a great clue for us to narrow down the shorebirds that we're looking at and try to identify them. Color pattern, leg color, and bill color can be very important. Vocal differences. There are some species that look almost exactly alike, but if you hear them, you can easily identify them just by the voice alone. Behavior is very important, and we'll give a couple examples of that today. Feeding style, habitat, whether they're in a beach, pond, mudflat, fresh or salt water, rocky shoreline, all of those can give us clues to help identify these shorebirds. And then location and timing, of course, can have a big impact. If you're seeing a shorebird in the middle of summer, chances are it's one of the shorebirds that spends its entire life cycle in the Caribbean, as opposed to one that nests in the high Arctic. As we said, size is crucial to ID. This is a great visualization of the range of size of shorebirds that occur in the West Indies. You can have your large ones that are pigeon-sized or larger, medium birds, maybe the size of a thrush, smaller birds maybe getting down to the size of a banana quid. We mentioned body shape and bill length. We have some great examples of the silhouettes here for us to look at. And I would encourage everybody to even come back to this slide in the future as you're beginning to identify shorebirds, because this is a really great guide on things to look for. So let's start off with some of the larger shorebirds. This one is the largest shorebird that commonly occurs in the West Indies. Has that long curved bill and kind of a striped head. In other words, it has a light central stripe on the crown, and then kind of a dark brown streaky stripe, and then light, and then dark line through the eye, another light line under the eye. It's very streaked, very spotted, highly patterned bird. This is the whimbrel. Nests in the high Arctic and winters in numbers, especially in the southern Caribbean, but winters throughout the Caribbean and on into South America. Here we see a bunch of them on the right, standing on the shoreline. They can be they occur anywhere from saltwater to fresh. They're often seen in mangroves. They're really evolved to take that bill and probe deep in the mud for their food. So they never or very rarely see them on a rocky shoreline.
And just to comment on something interesting here, Jeff, is the picture on the left. You'll notice that the bird is very, very skinny. You can see its keel sticking through its breast. So this bird has just arrived in St. Martin on fall migration. And when they leave, to begin migrating, whether it's northbound or southbound, they feed like crazy. and they become very plump. They become like flying footballs, but then you can see the wear and tear, the reserves that they've used after a long migration, and they arrive very skinny and they just feed nonstop.
Yeah, many of these birds will leave the high Arctic and they'll fly straight to the Caribbean. And you can imagine how much energy they would expend in that. And at least it's a perfect example that they really need the Caribbean to fatten up. The next species we'll talk about is the American oyster catcher, very distinctive. Bright red chisel-shaped bill that it uses to, it can even crack open oysters' muscles. A very dark head. That eye and red eye ring really stand out. The black head and neck, dark brown back and wings, and then white underneath. But that red bill is really the thing that stands out that you see. What a fabulous bird. That's right, Emma. Included these are a couple of the rarer birds that might show up in the West Indies. These are Godwits. They winter far south in South America, but sometimes they will drop down into the West Indies during their migration. Hudsonian Godwit on the left is pretty much gray overall and whitish underneath in the non-breeding season, has a very strong eye line or line above the eye. Both of these have very long upturned bills. So if you see a large sandpiper, large shorebird with this very, very long, almost two-toned on the Hudsonian and definitely two-toned on the marbled Godwit, these very long upturned bills, then you're looking at a Godwit. And it'd be great to get photos of these because these are on the rare side in the West Indies, and it's wonderful to understand better how they utilize the West Indies during migration. Does anybody know what these are? They're kind of large shorebirds. They have that long bill, but they're not upturned like the Godwits that we were just seeing. They're pretty stout bills, fairly long, and they're not highly patterned. They're pretty much gray on top and gray and white underneath. And yep, I'm seeing a lot of people mentioning willet. This is the willet. There seems to be loud background. Is that from me, Lisa?
I don't know. Do you have somebody pouring drinks and like banging around a little bit?
My daughter is looking at me sheepishly.
Okay.
And saying sorry. Right. So yes. So
no worries. It was just coming through pretty loud. So if you can minimize that, okay. That's helpful. Okay. So yeah.
Sorry about that.
No problem. Yeah, good job on the ID on this one.
Yep. So I mentioned the willet is pretty unpatterned when they're standing, but one of the great things is when they take off and fly, they have a very distinctive pattern that you can see in flight, and they have that big long white wing stripe, black patch on the base of the primary coverts, and a dark base or dark ends on the primaries, white rump, and I think Lisa's going to also play the call, which is very distinctive. Yeah, noisy from my mic. There's a very distinctive call that you'll often hear, especially when they take flight, kind of a very loud trill sound. And this is a very common bird throughout the West Indies. It's noticed again that really thickish bill. It's not a very thin bill, and really unpatterned body, and very large shorebird, pigeon sized. And Lisa, I also encourage you to jump in at any time if there's other things that you're interested in mentioning that I miss.
Sure. Yep. Sorry, I accidentally played that twice, but I guess that's all right. Here we go.
All right. Yeah, one of the things that, and one of the reasons I encourage Lisa to do that is pretty much everybody has different features that they really look for. Some kind of look at an overall jizz of a shorebird, you know, its general shape and size, while others look for very specific field marks. So it's, I certainly encourage Lisa and Jessica to chime in as well with things that they particularly use for identifying some of these species. So this is the American avocet. Occurs fairly commonly in Cuba and has occurred in the Dominican Republic and several other places in the West Indies. It's a very distinctive bird simply based on the bill alone. It has a very long, thin bill that's upturned at the end. If you see a shorebird with that kind of a bill, pretty much guarantee it's an American avocet. In breeding and non-breeding, both, the body is very similar, dark-backed, and there's white stripe on the scaps, and the wings are dark with a white belly. And then in the breeding season, they have this kind of rusty tan head and neck, which turns grayish white in the non-breeding season. Very long-legged bird, similar in size to the black-necked stilt, which is what we have here. These very distinctive, bold black and white pattern, black back along the back of the neck over the top of the head, and then white pattern all the way from the forehead down through the neck and the belly. Legs are just stunningly pink, reddish pink. It has this long, very thin black bill. And I think also, Lisa, you have a recording of these as well?
Actually, I meant to add one and I forgot. Sorry about
okay.
that.
No
Yeah,
worries.
they're very loud.
They're very vocal. They're easy to see. They're often out in groups. And this is one that's a year-round resident in the West Indies. So expect to see this one any time of year. Now we'll get into a couple that are not quite so easy to tell apart. There's two species of yellowlegs, which is great because they have bright yellow legs. There's a greater yellowlegs and a lesser yellowlegs. There's three main ways to distinguish the two species. One is bill length compared to kind of the length of the head or the width of the head. You'll notice in these photos that the bill is much longer than the head width is. The other thing is greater and lesser yellowlegs have a significant size difference, and I think we'll be able to illustrate that in a minute or two. Plus, their vocalizations are different and distinctive.
All right, here's the greater yellowlegs.
So that vocalization, it kind of is a three, or works into a three-part 2-2-2 or QQQ, which is different than the lesser yellowlegs, which I think we'll play in just a minute. At least you can go on to the next.
Sure. Oops, let me go on.
And here we have a couple photos of the lesser yellowlegs. You can see how similar they are. Both have these bright yellow legs, very long legs, stand up very tall, similar patterned face and back and under parts. But on the bill length here, we see that the bill length is just about the same as the width of the head. So if you kind of measure the length of the bill with the length of the head, it's about the same, whereas in greater yellowlegs, the bill is substantially longer. And often the bill on greater yellowlegs appears thicker So the bill of the lesser yellowlegs often appears more needle-like. And Lisa, if you could also play. So on this one, you notice it's not a three-part QQQ or 222. It's more singular notes in a long series, or even sometimes doubled notes. But the two calls are pretty distinctive between the two, and that's another way to help separate greater from lesser yellowlegs. So here's a couple slides that really kind of give you some direct comparisons. You can really see the size difference in these photos between the two birds, but of course, if they're on their own, judging size can be really difficult. So it's great when you have a direct comparison in size, and it doesn't even need to be a greater and lesser yellowlegs. It could be, you know, a lesser yellowlegs and a black-necked stilt, but just some way of kind of gauging how large or small these shorebirds are can really help with the ID. And then also you can really see the bill to head width in the lower right. It's a great comparison. Some birds some birds kind of look intermediate, and that's where you really want to kind of start to look at bill shape as well. But generally you can tell these two apart by simply the length of the bill.
Yeah, and just to add that the greater yellowlegs, I think, is pretty similar in size to a black-necked stilt. But like Jeff says, if there's no other birds around to compare with, it can be really hard to tell the size, you know, whether if it's greater or lesser. So the bill length relative to the width of the head is the best character.
Yep.
Here's a little quiz for you.
Yep. Quiz number 1. Is this one a greater or lesser yellowlegs?
Yeah, just put it in the chat window. So it looks like most people are saying B, which is the correct answer. So if you visually measure the length of the bill and like fold it back on itself over with the width of the head, you can see it's about 1-to-1. Whereas if it's a greater, it would be about 1.5, the bill length to the length of the head. So you have to just do that in your mind to compare the bill length to the head width. Works pretty well.
Yep. Good.
Here's our second quiz. Hold on. Oh, yeah. So go ahead. Is this greater or lesser? Excellent job, all.
Good.
Everybody's saying A. And again, you can see here that this bill is longer relative to the width of the head. So it does work pretty well.
Yep.
All right. We're really testing your knowledge today. Tell us which species this is.
Very good. Looks lots of A's coming through.
Yep. You want to listen for that 3 or 4 note key, 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 or 222. And that's the greater. Great job, guys. All right, and here we have a little video for you showing you the feeding method. This is at Cargill Salt Ponds in Bonaire. So just take a look. So what species do we have feeding here? Any guesses? Okay, somebody said willet. Anybody else brave enough? So let's see, I'll play it one more time so you can take one more look. There's two species here. Look at the color of the legs. Look how fine the bill is. I think the bill is pretty long compared to the head, don't you think, Jeff?
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, it's one of those that is a toughy one, but
Yeah. Do you think greater or lesser? Well, it's definitely Yellowlegs, and then the other ones are sandpipers. We haven't talked about sandpipers yet. But anyway, just to show the feeding method is the Yellowlegs are known for their stroll and pick feeding method. Walking and picking at food in the water, typically. And
Yep.
then I think it's the greater Yellowlegs that will really like dance around in the water and whirl around and look for food.
yeah, and greater yellowlegs often has a thicker looking bill.
Mm-hmm.
Almost reminds me of a willet.
Yeah. Yeah, they can be confused.
It's kind of halfway between a willet and the lesser yellowlegs, I think.
Yeah. All right, we shall move on.
So next one's a solitary sandpiper, which isn't always solitary. They can certainly be seen in pretty small groups or scattered around amongst shorelines along with other shorebirds. Generally a freshwater or even brackish. Some of the key features for these guys, they have these yellowish green legs, so they could be potentially confused with the two species yellowlegs we were just talking about. But they have this bold eye ring, and that really stands out. Whereas the yellowlegs might give you a hint of an eye stripe, but the solitary really has that eye ring. And a rich brown back with very light, I would almost call them speckles scattered throughout the back. And kind of a shortish bill. The bill's about the same width of the head, maybe a little bit shorter. So the bill's on the short side. And did you have anything else to add to this, Lisa? I don't think we had a sound recording for this.
Yeah, we don't have a sound recording, but yeah, look for that bold white eye ring. And then also the behavior, it repeatedly bobs its upper body.
Mm-hmm.
Something to look out for as well.
Yep, similar to another species that we'll cover in a bit.
Yep.
So this is the stilt sandpiper, which has that eye stripe that we can see as well. It's similar to the yellowlegs, but the legs on the stilt sandpiper are a little bit shorter, and they're greenish yellow. They're not that really vibrant, bright yellow. They also have this fairly long bill that has a curve to it. It droops at the end. Whereas on a greater yellowlegs, the bill can sometimes, it's either straight or can appear to be a little bit upturned. And lesser yellowlegs pretty much always has a straight bill. In the stilt sandpiper, it has this slightly decurved bill. During the winter, it's the bird on the left is really what you would see in the West Indies. By the time they arrive at the West Indies, they've molted out of their breeding plumage, which you see on the right. But the keys here are fairly short wings, those greenish yellow legs that are fairly long, and that slightly decurved bill. This is one of the medium-sized shorebirds, maybe a smaller size of a smaller thrush, and it's very similar to the next species or two that we can go to now.
Yeah, and I'll just add one more point about the stilt sandpiper. It also has, the bill is also very heavy at the base as well, just looks like a long tubular bill. So keep an
Yep.
eye out for that. It appears very black. And then, yeah, the greenish yellow legs.
So actually here's some in flight, which is another key difference between that and the short-billed Dowitcher, which you'll see in the lower right along with the stilt. The stilt sandpiper has that white rump and very, very light tail feathers, almost white tail feathers. In contrast to what we'll see in the Dowitcher, the Dowitchers look very similar to stilt sandpipers, but instead of having that white rump, they have a white, kind of a white patch or streak that goes right up the back. And I think we have a flight shot of that in one of the next slide or two, so you'll be able to see that as well. But once you see stilts and Dowitchers in flight, they're very easy to tell apart by the white rump or that white line up the back. If we look down in the lower right, one of the behavioral differences between these two is caused by both the length of the bill and the length of the legs. When a Dowitcher feeds, a Dowitcher has shorter legs and a longer bill, so it doesn't have to tip up as much to get his bill probed into the mud to forage. So when it's foraging, it's very, the rear end of it pretty much stays level. And both of these species feed in a very similar pattern, almost like a sewing machine. But because of the stilt sandpiper's really long legs and shorter bill, it has to tip up the back end much higher than a Dowitcher does. And it's a very distinctive feature when the two are together. Other than that, they are very similar. They both have the white eye stripe. They both have pretty stout, long bills, greenish yellow legs, and a very similar color pattern on the body. One difference that you will see that's pretty subtle on the body is the Dowitcher will have a little bit of barring and spotting along the sides, whereas the stilt sandpiper is generally pretty white underneath. And
Anybody know what this is? All right, we shall move on. Take a look at how heavy that bill is. Long, heavy bill.
So this is some more detailed shots of the short-billed Dowitcher. Like I said, on the side of the non-breeding bird on the left, you can really see that little barring on the sides. But it's very similar in pattern to like I said, to the stilt sandpiper. Generally has a much straighter bill that's longer. The stilt sandpiper has a little bit of a curve to their bill, and the Dowitchers have a much straighter bill that might droop a little bit to the tip, but is pretty straight overall. Light colored to the base of the bill, you can sometimes see that, but you have to get a really good look at that. Again, it has a very similar eye stripe, and there's especially on the short-billed Dow, one thing I'll point out, because we may have some people may be wondering about how you tell short-billed from long-billed Dowitcher in the winter. There is bill overlap between the two on the bill length. So a short-billed Dowitcher has more mottling or speckling on the breast than a long-billed Dowitcher is. So if you see a Dowitcher in the non-breeding season that has a very clean gray breast, it's a good idea, or it's a hint that that might be a long-billed Dowitcher, and then getting photos on that would be really good because telling them apart can be very difficult. On this slide, I mentioned that white stripe up the back that you can really see in a Dowitcher that you don't see in the stilt. So when they're in flight, you can really tell the difference between Dowitchers. The Dowitchers are really the only ones that have that big white V or white stripe that goes up the back. The next. So I had mentioned briefly the long-billed Dowitchers. Here you can see the neck and breast is almost clean gray. So if you do happen to see a Dowitcher that has a clean gray breast as opposed to more speckled that you see in the short-billed. I would encourage you to take a picture of it. They are very, very hard to separate. Long-billed Dowitchers are very rare in the West Indies, but they do occur every once in a while. So it's always a good idea to be aware of what some of the other potentials are, just so you notice maybe what the difference between the very common short-billed and the very rare long-billed might be. Some of the things to look at. And the first thing I would look at is looking through a flock of Dowitchers are there some that really look to have a very clean gray breast?
Right. Yeah. Julian Moore in Barbados is commenting that he saw 2 this morning. So I think they are more common in Barbados, but more rare everywhere else.
Yeah.
But yeah, very hard to tell apart. If you think you have a different species, the long-billed, definitely get pictures to verify.
So this is another very long-billed, short-legged sandpiper. Often you will see them on the edge of water near vegetation or in vegetation itself. This is the Wilson snipe. Luckily, this one's very distinctive. It has a head pattern reminiscent of the whimbrel, a light central crown stripe and a couple other alternating dark and light stripes down the side of the face. But this is a long, straight bill, pretty short legs, really likes to hide in vegetation. And it has what looks to be these white stripes down the back, two on each side. Very distinctive pattern. And they are a North American breeder that spends, many of them spend the winter in the West Indies. Really fun to see. And if you're walking through a marsh or a wetland, this is the bird that will wait until you almost step on it before it flies up underneath your feet. This one probably is well known to most of the people on the call. It's a beautiful little bird called the ruddy turnstone. During the non-breeding season, they have this mottled look on the back, a mixture of reddish brown and very, very dark brown, almost black feathers. A very unique shape to the bill. It's very wide at the base, fairly short, goes down to a point. And as you can imagine, this bird, based on its name, does turn over stones when it's foraging. It takes that bill and flips over rocks and stones. This is one of the most common birds you'll see, especially on shorelines or rocky shorelines or even docks. They sometimes even like to sit on boats in a harbor when they're resting. They have these short reddish orange legs, white underneath, and a very mottled, like I said, the mottled back, and then the breast is this mottled black with a little bit of white. But really that bill, the legs, and that overall pattern is very distinctive for ruddy turnstone.
Yeah, this is a pretty common species throughout the Caribbean, so it's a good, what you might call a marker bird. If you learn this one well and you know its size, then you can compare other birds to it. It's a fun one to watch on the beach.
So this is the red knot, which is actually a bird that is declining rapidly. This is one of the shorebirds of most conservation concern that occurs in the West Indies. This is a medium-sized bird, maybe a little bit bigger than the turnstone body size. During the non-breeding season, they have this very plain look to the back. And these nice, we call them chevrons, or little V's on the sides. They have a pretty short, stout bill, and short, dark with maybe a little bit of greenish, but dark legs. It's like I said, it's a medium-sized shorebird, bigger than all the Peeps, and it's that very plain look to it, especially on the back and the sides. And it kind of points to red knot. A little bit of a hint of an eye stripe, But that bill shape, very thick at the base, tapering pretty rapidly. And in flight, you can't quite see it here. I'm not sure if there's I think we have a shot of these in flight. If you happen to catch them early in the season or very late in the season, they might still have some of this reddish color underneath that you see on the right side, which really helps to identify them as well. Especially in the West Indies, sometimes you'll have 3 or 4 birds that look like the one on the left, and then you'll have 1 or 2 that has a mixture of those reddish feathers on the like the right-hand bird, and that really points to red knot.
Yeah,
You
look out for the greenish legs too.
Yep.
We have
But
a question as to why are the red knots in particular declining so rapidly, or why are they of such conservation concern? What's the reason?
The reason for the conservation concern, of course, is because they are declining so rapidly. I think the current theories, at least that I know of, almost the entire population spends a good portion of the migration fattening up on the coast of New Jersey on horseshoe crab eggs. And they're almost an obligate because they really concentrate in this just a very small section of the coastline. And horseshoe crabs have also been utilized for scientific research as well as for bait for fishing. And the populations of the horseshoe crab, I know, have gone down substantially. And the theory that makes the most sense to me, at least, is that's having a big impact on the population, if not maybe driving the population decline. I think they are hunted a little bit, but I think probably the biggest thing is just horseshoe crab numbers on the central Atlantic coast of the US. Here's a couple of the birds in flight on the right-hand side. You can really see they have this rump patch is a kind of a light. It's not generally pure white. It's more of a grayish, but they have this light rump patch and dark on the tips of the tails. A little bit of pattern in the wings. So if you see a medium-sized shorebird with a shortish bill and that grayish white rump, then we're looking at a red knot. So the key there is really the rump and a little bit of the wing patch and that bill length in flight.
Another little quiz. Tell us in the chat window, what species do you see in this picture?
Don't be shy.
Come on, guys. Take a guess. It's not for marks. Certainly, you know the one on the bottom, many of you. Yes, ruddy turnstones. And yes, on the willet. It's just a very plain, large, gray shorebird, not very descript.
I can see the confusion with red knot. Certainly, the willet has a much longer legs and it's a much bigger bird, whereas the red knot would probably be a little bit bigger than the ruddy turnstone, but not nearly the size of the willet that we see here. And the eye stripe on the red knot would show up, I think, much more substantially, and a little bit more of a contrast between the back and the belly on those two. So this is a bird that in North America is more in the grasslands than wetlands, but in the wintering season, it can be seen anywhere from moist soccer fields to to shallow marshes. Usually with vegetation, but not always. Can even be seen in seaweed racks on the coast. This is a pectoral sandpiper. Some of the key features for the pectoral are that short, fairly thick-based, but slightly decurved bill. It's a yellowish bill. Also has yellowish legs. So the bill and legs are both yellowish. But one of the key things is that strong demarcation between all of the streaking and the gray, kind of gray, brownish gray ground color on the breast and grading to that white belly. It's a very sharp line between the two, and that's really distinctive. So between the bill shape, yellowish bill, yellowish legs, and that strong demarcation between the breast and belly, point to pectoral sandpiper. This is one of the medium-sized birds, very similar body size, I think, to the red knot, though it has probably longer legs than you would see on the knot. You can see in flight, it has a completely dark rump. So it's a dark tail and dark rump, grading up to a brown body. So it doesn't have that light colored rump that you would see in the red knot as well. So now we're going to switch over to a group of birds called plovers. Generally have large eyes, shorter, stubbier bills, and they don't probe. They really, for their food, they make short runs here and there on the beach or in mud flats and pick food off the surface. Let's see, this one, it's the same picture, I think maybe from a different direction, but this is the black-bellied plover. So during the breeding season, they have this solid black from their head and around their eye all the way to the belly, and then a big white stripe along the side, and then a mottled black and white back. When they reach the West Indies, generally they look like this non-breeding bird. They can still show some of the black feathers from the underneath that they haven't molted completely. So sometimes you'll see these with black feathers underneath. Some of the key features to look at is this large looking eye, what looks like a very distinct crown, and then a light stripe above the eye, and that really thick plover-like bill. They have dark legs, and during the winter, they generally have the same speckled look to the back, but it's usually brown and white as opposed to the black and white. And again, sometimes they can still show some of the black feathering underneath. If you see them in flight or when they raise their wings, they will have this black patch right under the wing. And that's very, very distinctive for black-bellied plover. And they also have a light colored rump. So if you see them in flight, you can look for that very dark underwing patch. And here's a couple more photos where you can really see that dark underwing patch and that light colored rump. And on the lower right, we can see a bird that's still molting. It has quite a bit of dark from the belly still with it. And you can definitely see them both in molting into and out of breeding plumage, as it's noted here in the West Indies. They're usually higher up. They're usually not at the water's edge, usually in drier, sandier, muddy areas. A similar species is the American golden plover. You can see, looking at the breeding bird, it's very similar, black underneath with that white crescent, but it has more golden colors on the back, golden black spotting as opposed to black and white of the black-bellied plover. But again, likely to see the ones in the West Indies will be like the non-breeding bird here. They have that very similar dark cap, but the dark cap isn't as strong as in the black-bellied plover. They look much more slender, more dove-like, maybe, way to think of it. And the bill is much more narrow. It's not nearly as thick and stout as a black-bellied plover. And so they look smaller, and especially when you see them together, they look very different. But these birds kind of, and maybe it's the head shape, the size to a small neck, always makes me think they're a little dove-like. And I very rarely, if ever, get that idea from black-bellied plover. So quick quiz. You can see how similar these two birds are, but if people could type in the chat what they think we have here, would be great. Take a stab at them.
And just a clue, the one on the left is different from the one on the right. And yes, good job.
You're
Plover.
making it easier.
Way to go, Justin. So bird on the left, right? Tell us what you think that one is. This is a good rare picture of the two species together, isn't it?
Yeah.
You can really see how that white eyebrow stripe stands out more from the dark crown on the one on the right. It is challenging, Emma.
Yep.
Right, yes. Black-bellied on the left and American golden plover on the right.
Yep. So the one on the left just looks beefier. You know, it doesn't look slim and trim. And whereas the bird on the right definitely has a much more slim and trim look to it. If it raised its head up, you know, it would give me a much more dove-like look than the one on the left. And the bills, you can really see here, the bill on the right is a little stouter than the one on the, sorry, I'm backwards. I always get my right and left confused. The one on the left is black-bellied plover with that thicker bill and stouter look. The one on the right has a much thinner bill, stronger eye stripe, and just looks like a slimmer bird and smaller. So which one's this?
Type in the chat, A or B. Excellent. You guys are good.
Yeah. Yep. That thicker, stouter bill, stouter body, bigger head. But really that bill compared to the head really points to black-bellied plover.
How about this one? Yeah, so this one has the prominent white eye stripe with the dark crown, and it has no black wing pits. So that's going to tell you that it's the American golden plover.
Yep.
So good job. Now the American golden plover is much more rare than the black-bellied in the Caribbean, but it does show up occasionally. So you do need to be aware of the difference between the two.
Yep. And the golden plover is actually even more likely to be like in a mowed field,
Yeah.
you know, short grass.
Yep. I've seen them on golf courses, for example,
Yeah.
Turks and Caicos. I'm sure Eric Salamanca can relate to that.
Yeah. So the next set of plovers we're going to look at have a variation on these breast bands. This one's the killdeer, which has two prominent breast bands. It's you know, pretty even brown back, white underneath, but it has these two black bands that go across the breast, and then yeah, the dark stripe through the eye and across the forehead, and another stripe that goes to the bill. But the key here is that it has two bands on the breast as opposed to one. And then Lisa, I think it has a very distinctive call. It's actually named for the call it makes. And Lisa, I'll mute myself so we don't get feedback. But if you want to play that. So if you use your imagination a little bit, you can almost hear it saying, "Kill deer, kill deer." when it makes those calls, and it often does that from on the ground or in flight, especially if it's been startled. This is a bird you'll often see quite a ways away from water. It can be in gravel beds, even gravel roadsides. But those two black bands are really distinctive. That's the key to look for. So the next plover, all the rest of the plovers we're gonna cover have single bands. Wilson's plover has these large black eyes, very, very almost a black-bellied plover kind of bill, thick and stout, fairly long. Females have this reddish collar that goes across the breast, whereas the males have a almost black collar that goes across the breast, and then these fleshy yellow colored legs. Some of the key feature really here is that single breast band, the large eye, and that big black bill. They're pretty much restricted to brackish and salt water. You'll often see these in sandy areas in mangroves or salt ponds, and even on the shoreline.
Yeah, these birds always appear to me to have a really heavy black bill and very large black eye.
The next one's a semi-palmated plover. Has what some people refer to as this wet sandy colored back. They're still pretty dark backed, not quite as dark as a killdeer, but they have a fairly dark brown back. Yellowlegs is one of the keys to look at, and that short stubby bill. It's not that big stout long bill that you see in a Wilson's plover. It's almost like the bill is a miniaturized version of a Wilson's bill. It has that dark breast band that goes all the way across. That's fairly broad on the sides and then narrows down right at the base of the throat. But some of the keys here are the yellow legs, the smaller miniature Wilson's plover kind of bill that is orangey at the base, mostly black.
Yeah, keep in mind that dark brown or medium brown back,
Yep.
color of wet sand, and then compared to this one, which is much paler.
Right. So this one has a similar leg color, yellow legs, similar shaped bill, though the bill might be a little stouter, but it has a much lighter colored back than you would see in the semi-palmated plover. The piping plover has very light back. The collar is not nearly as wide as you would see in semi-palmated when it's on the breeding season males, and in the non-breeding season, the collar, you just get the hint of a collar. It doesn't go all the way across the throat. It stops at the sides of the neck. So some of these differences can be pretty subtle. But with a good look and looking at multiple characteristics, I often encourage people don't look at one characteristic and make an ID, because there's enough variation in many of these shorebirds and plovers that really it's a good idea to look for multiple characteristics like leg color, bill shape, and maybe in this case the shape of the breast band and the color of the back before making sure it's a piping plover versus semi-palmated, for example.
Yes, and then also being aware of the species' normal range is helpful too. If you're likely to see it or not on your island. So the piping plover winters mainly in the Bahamas and the Turks and Caicos Islands, but it can be rare. Oh, and also Cuba, especially on the northern coast in the Keys. But other than that, it's rare in most other Caribbean countries as far as we know, but of course there's still lots of areas that haven't been surveyed. So you won't see it as commonly in other areas, but always do be on the lookout for it. A very pale bird. Also check out how pale it is around the eye here, whereas in the semi-palmated. The eye is not going to be completely visible. It's got some brown around it, so that's a good field mark as well.
So the next one is a snowy plover. Very similar to the piping plover. Some of the distinctive features are the leg color, whereas the piping and semi-palmated plovers have these yellowish legs. Snowy plover has these very dark gray legs. The back is a little darker than the piping plover, but I think that often depends on the plumage that the bird's in. The bill isn't nearly as stubby and stout. It has a more of a longer, slender black bill than you would see in the previous bird, the piping plover, and doesn't have that complete collar even in the breeding season. It just has black on the sides of the neck. The collar doesn't go all the way around the throat. In the non-breeding season, it's much more similar. The collar is much more similar to piping, but again, the leg color and the bill shape and the fact that the bill's all black, doesn't have any orange at the base, are keys to separating those two. Snowy plover has a broader distribution throughout the West Indies, and it really likes upland sand and shore, but you can see them also on the shorelines as well. They really blend in to sand and seashell piles.
Yeah, and it's also one of the species that breeds in the West Indies.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Along with, what else? Wilson's plover.
Yep. Killdeer.
Yep, killdeer. Yeah, so Emma is asking, how common are piping plovers in the Caribbean, and are they also in decline?
So I don't recall, frankly, Lisa, you may remember whether they're still in decline or not, whether the conservation efforts have kind of halted that decline. I frankly don't know offhand. They're fairly common in the smaller range that Lisa was mentioning, where a decent bit of the wintering population goes and winters in the Bahamas, Turks and Caicos, and I think we're finding more and more of them. Not me, but the folks in Cuba are finding more and more of them along the north coast of Cuba. There are scattered records throughout the rest of the West Indies, I think, but by far the population really winters in the Bahamas and the Lucayan Islands in Cuba, northern Cuba.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of conservation efforts for this species, so I think that their numbers are gradually ticking up again.
Yeah.
I think efforts to protect their nesting habitat, and we certainly need to do our part and protect their wintering habitat as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of efforts in the breeding range on the Atlantic coast to fence in the breeding or the nesting areas on beaches to try to keep out both tourists and predators, and I think it's having an impact.
Yep, absolutely. Up here in Massachusetts, when we go to the beach in the summer, there are whole sections of beaches that are roped off. And usually there's good signage explaining why, but you can stand outside the ropes and see the piping plovers sitting on their nests or tending their chicks. So, the stewards in all of the breeding range have been doing a really good job of making sure that the birds can nest successfully. They don't get harassed by dogs or people and so forth. So it's having a positive impact, and I think the population is coming back, which is great news.
Yep.
So another little quiz for you. Tell us what these species are. Think back on everything that you just learned about the color of the bird, the leg color, bill color. What do you think A is? And what? Take some guesses. Good job, you guys. Carmen's got it right.
Who
Yes,
let him in here?
I don't know.
While people are answering, we do have another question, which is, I can't tell the difference between some of these species, and I'm betting they can't tell the difference between each other. With that in mind, is hybridization common in shorebirds?
Good question. I think it's much less common than we might expect given how hard it is for us to tell them apart. Not only what we're seeing is mostly winter plumage or non-breeding plumage. The breeding plumages are often much more striking, and the vocalizations are often different as well. So I think they're really good at telling themselves apart. I think it's just us that really struggle. And it's definitely more difficult in the non-breeding season than it is in the breeding season. So I guess we're lucky that way.
Yeah, we are lucky. But yes, so most of you are saying piping plover for A. That is correct. Look at those bright orange legs and the wintering plumage. It's going to have that all black bill and just very, very pale back, color of dry sand. B is the snowy plover. Look at the color of the legs. This one has the gray legs as opposed to the yellow or orange yellow legs of the other two species. And these are all small wintering plovers. And then C is the semi-palmated. And that one you can see here, the eye has brown around it. It's got the stubby bill with orange at the base, a little bit more yellowish legs, a dark brown back, the color of wet sand as opposed to the color of dry sand in the piping plovers. So very subtle differences, but if you take the time to look at them and study, then you can figure them out. So these are all small plovers, pretty similar in size. The Wilson's plover would be quite a bit bigger and have a much heavier bill. But good job.
Yes. And now we'll get to the small sandpipers. And these are the things that are definitely on the small side. In fact, as the size of piping or snowy plovers are even smaller than that. They generally have thin, pointed bills, small eyes. They're generally walking horizontally, and they feed by a little bit of probing, but a lot of surface feeding. They're often in very large flocks, mixed flocks, so they can be a big challenge. And Lisa would probably agree with me. I think this is the group that is by far the hardest to separate. And this is the group where I will say, yep, that's a Western, that's a semi-palmated, and those other three, I just can't tell. So I would encourage you, don't be afraid to say, I'm not 100% sure. I know it's one of these two, but not sure which.
Yeah. So somebody was asking, is this a least? And we will get into it in a minute, but no, it is not a least. I can tell you that.
Look at the leg color and the pattern on the throat and breast, that there's not really a pattern there. But yeah, we'll get into that.
Yep. Shape of the bill. All right, this one's not too bad, right, Jeff?
No, this one isn't too bad. This is the one that you most often see on the beach. It's called a Sanderling, and it really likes the sand, and it really likes the waves. It feeds in literally almost in the waves. This is the bird that you will see running up and down, almost chasing the waves back and forth on the coast. Generally, you'll see the adult on the right in winter. Very, very light colored looking bird, very white underneath, almost white on top in the back. And one of the other distinctive features is often you can see this dark patch at the front bend of the wing that stands out against a very white or very light colored body. Black bill, black legs, bill's fairly short and stout, pretty stout throughout its whole length, and a little bit decurved, but a shortish bill, definitely substantially shorter than the head. But behavior, this is the wave chaser, and it's very, very light gray, almost white bird.
Yeah, and I just also like to point out, for me, this is a really good field mark. It usually stands out in the wintering plumage. It's this black smudge or black mark on the bend of the wing. You can usually see that in the field. So that's helpful to clinch your ID. But yes, a very pale bird.
And here's some of them in flight. You can almost see the head looks white there, with that dark eye really contrasting with the white head. It has this very, very strong black and white wing pattern, reminiscent of the willet that we looked at much earlier. But again, this is the most common bird that you'll see on sandy shores, and it's the one that runs up and down the beach. And that eye really stands out in that almost white, total white head.
Yeah, and even on this picture where the birds are further away, you can still pick out that black smudge there.
Right.
So make a note in your field guide to look for that.
Yep. And you can see on the, I was going to say on the birds in flight, you can see where that black smudge comes from, right at the bend of the wing.
Right. Yep. Yep. Good point.
The spotted sandpiper. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. So this is a spotted sandpiper, very different between the breeding and non-breeding season. Most common plumage that we'll see is the one on the right, where it's a very dark, unpatterned brown, or looks very unpatterned from the bill over the top of the head, down the neck, all the way through the back and wings, and white underneath. One of the keys there is you can see almost like a finger of white that comes up on the side in the front of the wings. And usually that's fairly easy to see and pretty distinctive for the spotted sandpiper. Has yellowish legs, generally a darker bill, certainly in the non-breeding season. Behavior is a really good clue for this bird. Lisa was mentioning earlier, the solitary sandpiper has a tendency to bob. The spotted sandpiper does as well. It's almost always bobbing as it's walking along the shoreline or mud flats. Really, if you see a bird that's walking along, it's constantly bobbing, it's probably a spotted. If it's longer legged, then begin to think about solitary. But spotted is by far the one that bobs the most, I guess, is maybe the way to put it. Pretty much restricted to freshwater, can be anywhere from freshwater marshes, along the edges of roads, and even along rivers and streams. You can see these. In the breeding season, you can see why they're called spotted. They have all these spots on the breast. Sometimes those spots will be maintained or won't have completely molted out when the birds arrive in the West Indies. So sometimes you may see one of these with a few spots as well. But really, that behavior really stands out, and that white spur up the side of the body right in front of the wings is pretty distinctive.
Yes, and then also their flight is distinctive. They have very shallow, rapid wing beats. So if you see a bird that just does a few quick wing beats glide, that's the spotted sandpiper as well. Yep. That's very distinctive for the species. Okay, so now we have a short video to show you this teeter-tottering bobbing behavior. It's of a breeding bird because I couldn't find a high quality video of a bird in wintering plumage. So this might not be the plumage we typically see, but the showing the behavior is good in this video. So let's hope this plays. So this is pretty cool. You can see a little chick walking through the grass, and even the chick spot that they're just newly hatched and downy, and they already have that tail bobbing behavior. All right, onwards.
Onwards. So now we're going to get into a group that are called Peeps, and these is a set of sandpipers that look very, very similar. This is the simplest one to tell apart. This is called the White-rumped sandpiper. And I don't know if Lisa, if offhand you have a length of these, but they're definitely on the small side. I think they're range from like 4 to 5.5 inches in the group, so they're all pretty small shorebirds. The white-rump, a couple of key features is if you look very closely, the wings are actually longer than the tail. And amongst the peeps that are fairly common in the West Indies, the white-rump is the only one that has wings that are longer than the tail. They also have a white rump, and none of the other peeps show a white rump in flight. They have the stronger white eyebrow, black bill, black legs, which is most of the peeps have as well. But one of the other features that you can really look for on a white rump is you can see on the sides, the flanks of the bird, that's the left-hand photo, has these dark streaks that range from the front all the way to the back. That's another pretty distinctive feature of the white rump. So you often can't see that, or I don't see that very often in the field, but if you can take pictures of a bird that you suspect is a white rump, you can often zoom in and start to see these dark streaks on the sides. But some of the key features are really the white rump and the wings being longer than the tail. And then if you get a really good look, those streaks along the sides. Ooh, this is a fun quiz.
Cruel, aren't we?
Yes.
All right. Peeps, make a guess. What do you think A is? What do you think B is? And what do you think C is? You can look at leg color. You can think about the name of the bird and what characteristic we're seeing. That's a subtle hint. Good job on B for white-rumped.
Yes.
Good short-term memory. Yeah, this is challenging.
Yep. You have to think back to early on in the presentation for A.
Yes. Species that had the white going up the back. We showed a picture of it in flight.
Right.
Fairly large.
Yep,
big bird, long bill.
Yep.
Yeah, somebody's saying A, Dowitcher. Good job.
Yep.
That is the short-billed Dowitcher. And B, yes, white-rumped sandpiper. And then C, I think we did talk about it, but yes, stilt sandpiper.
Yep.
Excellent job.
Yep, the white rump and almost white tail.
Mm-hmm. And the leg color is a clue too.
Yep. Yes, C was difficult.
Mm-hmm. Now we're getting into it.
Yeah. So this is another one of the peeps, also black legs, black bill, little bit of that white eye stripe you can see in the left hand, white underneath. what you see is even though on the right-hand side, some of the breeding birds has a little bit of streaks, those disappear completely in the non-breeding bird of Western Sandpiper, unlike the White-rumped where you can still see those streaks in the wintering White-rumped. Bill shape is one of the best ways of telling this one from the other bird that we'll show in a second, the semi-palmated. It has a very heavy base at the bill, kind of have a slight droop at the tip. It's mostly a straight bill, and then it has that slight droop. The bill of Western Sandpiper averages longer than semi-palmated, but it's not guaranteed. Female semi-palmated sandpipers of the longer billed side can have bills that are actually longer than male Western Sandpipers. But if you see a very long bill with a droopy tip, it's kind of outside of that average. You're pretty confident that it's a Western Sandpiper, and then shorter bills tend to be semi-palmated sandpipers. When you're looking at the breeding bird, you can kind of see there's some rusty or reddish brown coloration to some of the scapulars on the back. Those can be carried over, especially in juvenile birds, to the non-breeding season. So if you see a line of feathers with kind of a reddish brown cast to them, that also points to Western Sandpiper. And one of the other things that I find very subtle and very hard to use in the field, but I know some people have very good luck with it, is there's not as much contrast between the cap and the white above the eye. There's kind of a less contrasty face on Western Sandpiper compared to semi-palmated sandpiper that we'll look at next. I don't know, Lisa, if you have any other cues to think of that you use?
Yeah, I think you covered it pretty well. I have learned that they supposedly have a relatively larger head and thicker neck than the other two peeps.
Semi-palmated. Yes, thank you. That was one of the other things. They have a tendency to look front heavy when they stand. And that the picture of the breeding bird kind of shows that. They just look, they're heavier necked and chested than semi-palmated sandpiper. Again, it's a subtle thing and it depends so much on the posture of the bird and what the bird's doing. But that is another thing to look at. And this is a case where it's really important to not look at one feature, but kind of look at all the features together and have the multiple features guide an identification. Because identifying Western sandpipers is very difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yes, as Jeff said, sometimes the birds with the longer, heavier, the typical bills that are longer, you can definitely say with confidence, yeah, that's a Western, but then there is overlap. There's some individuals that have shorter bills that overlap with the semi-palmated, so that's where it gets challenging.
Yep. And you can see why. This is the semi-palmated sandpiper. Looks pretty similar. In breeding season, they're pretty distinctive. They're much more distinctive, but in non-breeding, they have that similar black bill. Tends to be shorter, and black legs, similar to Western. The face usually has, like I said, a more contrastiness to it. You can see this bird appears to be more balanced on its legs than maybe the Western Sandpiper we were just looking at. But again, all these features can be pretty subtle. This bill, I would say for semi-palmated, is kind of an average, maybe on the shorter side for semi-palmated. So if you see a bill that's kind of this shape or even smaller, like the breeding bird there has a smaller bill, that pretty strongly points to semi-palmated sandpiper. But again, I would encourage you to look at multiple cues, just to get a sense. Does the bill look big or small? What's the face look like? Does it appear balanced on its legs? Does it appear more front heavy? by any chance, is there any reddish or reddish brown coloration to the scapulars along the back, and just use all of those cues together to try to distinguish between the two. I will say that semi-palmated sandpiper is much more common, especially in the southern West Indies than western. I think there might still be some debate for the Greater Antilles, especially the Bahamas and Cuba. These westerns, if memory serves me correct, and correct me if I'm wrong, Lisa, but I think westerns are fairly are more common in Florida, in the southern U.S. in the winter. But
Yeah.
I'm dredging up something from several years ago, so
Yeah.
I'm sure that's accurate.
Yeah. I believe they're more common in Cuba relative to other locations too.
Right.
But
Which
yeah.
makes sense. But as you go south, semi-palmated becomes much more common than western.
We did have a question about semi-palmateds from someone watching on our Facebook page. They actually asked this question for the semi-palmated plover, but it's relevant here too, is why the name semi-palmated?
That is a good question. And I don't see it on the bird, but the the feet of the semi-palmated sandpiper actually have a little bit of webbing between the toes. And if you get a good look at the feet, you can actually see that webbing on the semi-palmated sandpiper. And I believe you should be able to see it on the plover as well. But you definitely can see it on the semi-palmated sandpiper. So it's a subtle feature, but it is something you can see with a very good look or a good photo of the feet. All right, now, so this is, I initially thought this was a quiz, but I don't think it is. That would be cruel. So we can see some of the features here. You can really see, especially in the top photo, kind of the outliers on the bill size, bill length. And I would almost say that right-hand bird in the top photo does look pretty heavy chested. Very plain faced, not much in the way of an eye stripe at all in that upper right bird. But the bill shape there, the bill length on that one compared to the bill length on the bird behind it is very, very different. It's a fairly short-billed or average semi-palmated sandpiper on the left and a pretty long-billed western sandpiper on the right. Kind of the same thing with the photo below. You can also see on the western sandpiper, on the lower photo, you get a little bit of a hint of the reddish brown in the feathering on the back. It's very subtle, very hard to tell. And again, that's one of the reasons why we tend to look at multiple features as opposed to a single feature. You can also see the birds on the lower photo. There's more contrast in the cap and the eye stripe on the semi-palmated than you see on the western next to it. But again, all of these are very subtle, and this is probably the biggest ID challenge in the West Indies. So
Yeah, I would say
don't be afraid to say it's either a western or a semi, but I'm not sure which.
yeah. And I'm guessing this photo was taken in the spring or summer, and this is probably more in winter, because we don't normally see much of the reddish on the birds in the West Indies during the winter.
Right. It's usually the juveniles that would show that, carry that over.
Yeah.
I think the top photo was Bonaire, if I remember right.
Yes, looks like it.
Yep. So the last peep that we will talk about today is a little bit easier because it has yellow legs, unlike all the others that we've talked about, the other three. And this is the smallest of the peeps. So if you see a flock together and you see some really little ones, chances are these are the least. They have a tendency, in my mind, to be more brownish overall on the back, than whereas semi-palmated and Western tend to be more gray. Again, look for the Yellowlegs. It does have that black drooping bill. It's very similar to the other two species. Be aware that the Yellowlegs, as mentioned here, can get covered in mud, so sometimes they can appear dark. But you can also look for that general brownish color and the relative size. These are often on the shoreline more than semi-palmated and Western. They're smaller birds, so they don't go out as deep into the water. And I don't know if you remember the Pectoral sandpiper that has that sharp demarcation on between the breast and the belly. Least sandpipers can often give that same look. They almost look like miniature Pectoral sandpipers. It's not quite as strong as you would see in Pectoral, but they often have much more brown mottling on the throat than the previous two, and they tend to have a sharper line or sharper demarcation between that throat and the belly.
Yeah, for me, the species too, that the bill is thinner, more petite, and it usually shows like a slight down curve, the shape of the bill, and that's helpful.
Mm-hmm. And I think that was the last one we're going to talk about. Now we'll get into some fun quizzes. So what two species do we think we have here? First off, what do we think A is?
Yep, they should be pretty easy. We just talked about the leg color. Slimmer down curved bill, more brown on the back rather than grayish in the other two peeps. Good job. Yeah, most people are saying A is least sandpiper. How about B? That one's more challenging. I would say that bill looks pretty heavy at the base, don't you think, Jeff?
Yeah, it's hard to say with the background, but it looks pretty long to me too.
Yeah.
And the cap and the eye stripe don't really contrast very much.
So that suggests Western.
Suggests Western.
Yes. And that's what we believe it is. It's not a super long bill, but it's fairly long. Yeah,
it's hard to tell because there's a dark rock behind it.
Yeah, that's true. Yep. Yep. So A, least sandpiper, B, Western. Good job. This is on Bonaire. You can see all the salt crystals that they're walking on, feeding on, there were little like brine flies all over the dikes. All right, good job, you guys. Here we go, another little quiz for you. What do you think A is? There's one bird in the middle and then the other birds standing around it, I believe are all the same, a different species. So based on what you just learned, what do you think A is?
Oh, I see him.
There's another photo from Bonaire. Yep, good job. Western. Again, it's got a pretty long bill, thick at the base, drooping at the tip. The face on this one seems to contrast more between the stripe and the crown.
Yeah.
It looks more.
Yep. That's why I always look for multiple things.
Yep, this could be.
Nothing's absolute on these birds.
Okay,
I was trying to look at the wing to tail length, but I can't really tell.
All right, how about B? What do you think B is? Okay, somebody suggested Sanderling, but this bird is too dark for Sanderling.
Yep, doesn't have that that dark bend at the wing. Yep.
Yeah, this is much more pale. So this is another peep, one that we just talked about. It is the semi-palmated. It's got a shorter straight bill. Black legs, that would rule out least. All these birds seem to have black legs. The Western also does appear a little bigger here as well. Sometimes it's not that obvious, but sometimes you can see it. It is a slightly larger bird on average.
I agree, Emma. Everyone should have a different leg color.
All right. Good job, guys. Anything else about this one, Jeff?
Nope, not that I have.
All right. How many species do you see? Write it in the chat box. What do you think, Jeff?
I think there's at least 4.
Okay. You better walk us through this.
Well, I'm kind of cheating because I only see its legs, but there's some yellow-green legs in there.
Oh, yes, you are right. Oh my gosh. What happened to the rest of the bird? Completely hidden. All right, so we learned that the Godwits have these long, tapering, thin bills that kind of curve up a little bit. So these are marbled Godwits, pinkish at the base, dark at the tip. Most of you said 3, and that's what I saw. I didn't have sharp enough eyes to see that bird hiding back here. We also see an American Avocet in winter plumage with the gray head, very thin upturned beak. And then we also have several willits. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. Very plain gray shorebird, straight bill, dark at the tip, grayish at the base. Can anybody, whoops, I'm sorry. Can anybody ID the one with the yellow legs? What's your guess, Jeff?
I don't have a guess.
That's for sure. Something is back there. Oh, I think I see a little bill sticking out too, right there. Look at that. Looks like it's yellowish at the base and darker at the tip. Well, not sure, we can't see it. All right. Which 2 species do you see here? This is kind of challenging. Any guesses? What are we looking at? Think about the pale shorebirds that we talked about for wintering plumage. So I see some that are quite pale, black bill, black eyes. I see a little black smudge there. Yes, somebody is saying piping and sanderling. That is correct. Jeff, are you seeing anything else?
I don't think so.
Yeah, so as the piping comes into breeding plumage, it gets that black forehead, but some of these other birds and the black ring, but some of these other birds are still in their wintering plumage. I think this is from the Bahamas, doing piping plover surveys. But a lot of piping plovers with a short stubby bill, and then you can see in here sanderlings, a few sanderlings mixed in. They have a longer bill. They're also very pale. They have the black smudge at the shoulder. But look at the short stubby bill of the piping plovers. Colors are pretty similar though, aren't they? Yes, we all need to get to the Bahamas, Julian. All right, yeah, you got to look at that bill and realize that this is not a plover. The plovers have the short stubby bills. The sandpipers have the longer, thinner bills. Okay, good job, guys. How about this one? Can you name the 3 species? Yes, Natalia's favorite bird, ruddy turnstone. One of my favorites too. They are pretty obvious. How about the big one in the back? If you're not sure what it is, can you say what group it's in? Is it a plover? Is it a sandpiper? Yes, black-bellied plover is correct. It's a medium-sized shorebird, heavy black bill, big black eye, and it's non-breeding plumage. It's fairly plain grayish brown. Doesn't have much of an eyebrow stripe like the American golden plover. What do we think this one is here in front? That's a tough one. I would say Peep. Maybe not least. It doesn't look like it has yellow legs, but I don't think we can tell besides that. What do you think, Jeff?
I think it's a peep as well. I don't think it's the sanderling. I think it'd be a little bigger, but a sanderling also I feel would have a much lighter looking head.
Yeah. Yeah.
Much whiter looking to the face. And I think it's a semi-palmated.
Semi-palmated sandpiper. Yeah. So if it was a plover, it would have a short stubby bill. This bill is definitely longer, so it's not a plover.
As a context range clue, this was taken in Gloucester, Massachusetts, which you probably don't know the range of these birds for Massachusetts if you're watching this presentation. But Western sandpipers are not common here at all.
Okay, so that tells us it's most likely semi-palmated sandpiper then.
Yeah, it really seems like it has a lot of contrast to the face cap and an eye stripe. So if I had to make a guess, but I'd be a little leery of calling it myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Other than the range helps.
Yep. All right, so that was our last little quiz. We will be making this PowerPoint available on YouTube so you can go through it again. I'd also be happy to make the PowerPoint itself. This recording will be on YouTube. I would also be happy to make the PowerPoint available for you as well, because we have notes on all the species in with the slides. So we just want to share with you a few of the Shorebird resources that we have available to help you learn Shorebird ID. If you visit our website and you go to resources in the main menu and drop down, you'll find Shorebird resources, which will take you to a page with free downloads of some different Caribbean Shorebird ID guides that we've been showing you here. We've got this one that shows the can line of dancing shorebirds from biggest to smallest, which is really helpful. Showing you which ones are large, which ones are medium, which ones are small. And again, we can't stress enough just kind of keeping in mind the importance of looking at multiple clues or multiple cues, as Jeff was saying, you know, the size and the body shape and the bill length and shape and foraging behavior and habitat. You need multiple clues to really identify shorebirds. So keep that in mind as you're looking and learning these birds. And we do plan to print these ID guides and distribute them this winter. So keep an eye out for an announcement about that. We also have these really fun Shorebird posters. We have printed them in the past and we may print them again this winter. But they're fun to hang up on your wall or in your bathroom. So you can study them, or when you're eating breakfast, you can study them and maybe cover up the names of the birds and quiz yourself every day. And then some very helpful online resources. One we've talked about on Tuesday is the Merlin Bird ID app. Highly recommend that you get this for your mobile phone. It's super helpful. You can just answer, what is it, 5 questions, Jeff? I think you just have to, yeah.
I think it's 4.
Just 4 questions.
But it doesn't matter.
Yeah, anyway, Merlin will prompt you and ask you 4 questions, like the size of the bird. Where is it? You know, is it on the ground? Is it in a tree? Where it will know where you're located from your GPS. And just on a few questions, it will bring up likely birds that you're looking at. And it's amazing how accurate it is. And then you can also upload your photo and it will also try to ID it as well. It's really quite accurate. So it's a super helpful app for learning birds. Birds of the World is another fantastic resource. It's like an online encyclopedia for birds, really comprehensive. It has, you know, natural history information, taxonomy, management, conservation, range, migration, audio, video, everything. So you can study all the birds that you want to learn more about. And if you're a member of BirdsCaribbean, you have free access to this resource. Membership for Caribbean members is just $25 and Birds of the World annual subscription is $49. So great benefit of being a member of BirdsCaribbean. And then if you don't have it yet, look out for the 2nd edition of Birds of the West Indies by Herb Raphael, new updated paperback field guide with all kinds of updates and taxonomy and ranges and abundance and so forth. So definitely look for that. You can buy it on Amazon. We list it on our website and we have a review of it as well. Here are some more helpful resources. This one is called The Beginner's Guide to Shorebird. Super helpful little book. Definitely look out for that one. I found it to be really, you know, goes through all the shorebirds in a very organized way, giving you again all the tips that we've given you here today. This is another really good in-depth shorebird guide. If you want to become a serious shorebirder, I recommend getting this book. And then you got to carry out into the field with you things like bird ID cards. We do have wetland and seabird ID cards. Bring your field guide with you. And I also highly recommend bringing a camera with you. As Jeff was saying, a lot of these birds are hard to identify. So it's super helpful to have a camera along, take a picture, and then you can share it with us if you want to check on your ID. And we're all happy to help out and learn about this. If you get into birds, you'll learn that you start to collect field guides. This is just a few of the books that are on my shelf. It's really fun to have different field guides and look through them. Some of them have different photos, different ID tips. And so, you know, if you're into birds, start adding to your library. They're all really helpful, fun guides to have in your possession and carry with you in the field, study on the side and so forth. And one of the most important things learning about shorebirds, or any birds for that matter, is practicing. And that means getting out in the field and spending time at different wetlands, you know, just sitting down and watching the birds for a while, how they behave, how they move, how they forage. You know, shorebirds, if you're just learning them, they can be overwhelming to start with, especially if you see a big flock and all different species running around and feeding, you just don't even know where to start. So I would say, you know, spend time in the field. The more time you spend in the field, the faster you'll learn these birds. I think you see here, you know, a number of different professionals. They say it takes 10,000 hours of practice to become a professional. I don't know. What do you think it takes 10,000 hours, Jeff?
For some of the shorebirds, maybe.
Yeah. Anyway, the point is just take the time to go out in the field and spend time looking at birds. And while you're out there, observe the bird as much as you can. I think the tendency sometimes is to look at it, go to our field guide, say, oh, I think it's such and such, but gee, did it have black legs or yellow legs? And then you go up to look for the bird again and it's gone. So really make sure you get a good look at it while it's in view, because at any time it could fly away. So get a good look at it, take a picture of it, make mental notes, draw pictures of it, and then go to your field guide to figure out what it is.
Yep. And I would also encourage, you know, even after you identify it, continue to observe them, because there's so much you can learn that you know, about behaviors, feeding patterns, and you'll start to pick up subtle differences that we haven't covered, just by watching the birds and how they move, how they interact with each other, and, you know, get a good feel for size differences between birds. And yeah.
All right. And I do recommend, we recommend taking a journal with you out in the field, just a notebook where you can jot down notes. You can also write directly in your field guide, write some notes in pencil, keep a record of the birds. Of course, we recommend using eBird, but then it's also very helpful to write your own notes about what you're observing as you watch birds. And again, of course, as we emphasize, do take a camera and share any birds you're not sure about to ID. We have a Facebook page, we have a listserv, and I'll make sure we send you resources so that you can sign up for that. So here's a few helpful resources and links. Don't worry about jotting these all down, everybody that's registered for this webinar. And also if you're on Facebook, we'll be happy to send you an email and post all these different links, and you'll be able to see them on the YouTube recording. Okay, so we're coming to the end of the presentation. Thank you so much for joining and staying in touch. We hope you will stay in touch with us. We hope you'll become a member and follow us on social media if you aren't already. And we will, in a minute, just end the presentation, and then Jeff and Jessica and I will be on hand to answer your questions. So thank you so much for joining, and we will be here for a few more minutes to discuss shorebirds and answer your questions. We do still have a couple questions in the Q&A. So Jessica, if you could start bringing those up for us, that would be great.
Yep, so our first question is a great question, especially because our Caribbean Waterbird Census is underway. And so the question is, what happens if you're doing a count or making an eBird list and you just don't know which peep or which shorebird you're seeing? What do you do, Jeff?
So first of all, apologize for some banging you might hear in the background. We have an ice dam on the roof and water's leaking in the wall. So, but another reason why you should be in Jamaica and not Colorado. So as far as there's options to record peep spa. In other words, you know it's a peep, but you're not sure which one it is. So there are options for entering those sorts of things. Sorry, I'm trying to at least temporarily stop the banging here. There's also options in there for like Western. Western /
Yeah.
semi-palmated sandpiper. So if you know it's one of two, you can enter those as well. Those data are really just as valuable, and it's better to do that than to try to force an ID when you're not sure.
Mhm. Yeah, and feel free to send your photos to me and Jeff and Jessica. You know, we'll write our emails in the chat. We'll be happy to try to answer your ID questions, and then you can, you know, confirm the ID and enter it correctly in eBird. You can always go back into your checklist and edit your checklist. So again, taking photos is super valuable as a way to get the ID and also to learn as you go along, to have that photo for reference.
Yep, absolutely.
Another question is, why do some species prefer either brackish or fresh or salt water? Does it have to do with the food or something else?
I would say it's a combination of, it's probably mostly food, but I think I would say it's how the species has evolved over time. But I think it's probably mostly related to food, to vegetation, coverage, and like, you know, there's some birds that like wooded vegetation or grassy vegetation, and they just, you don't see them on the beach, for example, because it's, even though, whereas if you have salt water, I should say, with the same type of grassy vegetation, you might see that species in both salt and fresh. So I think a lot of it's habitat, and then a lot of it's food. Lisa, you may have a better insight into that, but so
Yeah.
it's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
And one I would say that we probably don't have a clear answer to, at least in all cases.
Yeah, I think these different species have evolved to prefer different foods and therefore different habitats, or vice versa. But yeah, some are more tolerant and prefer salt ponds or brackish water versus fresh. And some are quite generalist too. You can see them in many different kinds of habitats. So, but typically they have preferences, and you'll see them in one kind of habitat over another, for example.
One last question that came up in our Facebook page is, even though it's not common in the Caribbean, do we ever get common sandpipers in the Caribbean, which is a Eurasian species?
Very, very rarely. I think there might be one, maybe two records. So it's a European bird that's very similar to a spotted sandpiper, if my memory serves me. The Caribbean does usually get one or two European sandpipers every year. And I think common has shown up a couple times. Red shanks and green shanks will show up. Wood sandpiper, and yeah, but very, very rarely. And usually those are out on the Lesser Antilles, you know, the areas that are closer to the European flyways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we should mention we didn't cover all the rare and vagrant shorebirds that show up in the Caribbean, so you always need to be on the lookout for something that looks different and take a picture of it. So we didn't talk about Baird sandpiper, which is a rare bird. We didn't talk about phalaropes, which are another rare shorebird. What else did we miss, Jeff?
Pacific golden plover looks very similar to American. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Collared plover shows up in Trinidad.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's a South
Also,
American species.
In Grenada as well. So yeah,
Julie Moore just mentioned stints. Sometimes we'll see the European stints, which are
mm-hmm.
the European peeps.
Yeah. So yeah, shorebirds are tricky, and
There's more to learn.
Always learning. That's what's great about them. Always learning. Telling apart breeding, wintering, young birds, adults, the different peeps. Yeah, they look similar, but especially in their wintering plumage. But that's what makes them so much fun. They're challenging and fun. All right. Well, if there are no more questions, we will let you guys go for the evening. Thanks for hanging in there. We went a little long, but hopefully you found it worthwhile. And we'll look forward to staying in touch with you. And within a couple days, I will email everybody with a link to the recording on YouTube. And I will also send you a link to the PowerPoint. So you have that as a reference as well.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks so much to all for attending, and to Jeff and Jessica for helping to pull this all together.
And thanks, Lisa.
Yep. Okay, take care, everybody, and good luck on your CWC. Let us know what you're seeing. Take care, everybody. Bye for now.